is a tough situation for Dr. Goldstein. He thought he was doing what it is that he should do. And frankly, if I had been facing the same situation in July of 2004, actually this was 2001, June of 2001, I would have probably made the same decision about not warning because of the way the law is crafted. But there were a whole lot of clinical steps that could have been taken that may have reduced harm. And I may not know or think of those at any given time. I may, miss a few of them, and each of us can miss a few of those options. But it speaks to the benefit on a regular basis of consulting with one another, and also particularly when we hit risky or difficult cases that we consult more rather than less. Okay? So the first issue that I want to raise and the first thing that I want to suggest is that consultation is crucial. Because even where we may be following the law to a T, we may know the law, we may say, this is what I do, we're still wanting to focus on how can we reduce the likelihood of harm and maintain or increase the likelihood of benefit to clients. And there are, as those of you who've heard me speak occasionally before, at least a few benefits from my perspective to doing consultation. One of those benefits is that it helps in ambiguous situations to establish the standard of care. So here, I would argue that it was not ambiguous, actually, that the standard of care was fairly long established. It was almost 18 years of the statute being interpreted in the way that we all had been taught. Okay? Still, where situations are less clear, when we have colleagues giving us input and saying, well, this seems like a reasonable course of action, and the person says, yeah, I think the same, and so on, then we help to establish what the standard should be in that situation when it's not very clear. Now, so it helps to establish a standard of care. The second thing that it does is it checks our thinking. A long time ago, 1954, 53, it's the Judd Marmor article about basically the occupational hazard of superiority in the analyst, right? And although many folks have talked about this in different ways, and Eric Harris had created this particular graph, and those of you who are statisticians will pardon me for having an inaccurate, it's just a heuristic, it's not a very good graph. It says, you can see risk, it's got a linear relationship here with the narcissism of the provider. That higher risk, that the higher the narcissism of the provider. Well, while Eric jokes about that, I actually think that's very true, but it's true not in the sense of a necessarily characterological risk, or excuse me, characterological narcissism. It is true in terms of as people come to us over years and years, and we know what we're doing, there's an increased risk of thinking we know what we're doing. And we have to maintain our humility. And so consultation is very helpful in that regard. When we have people who are willing to challenge our thinking and talk to us about what it is that we're planning, make suggestions that might differ than what we would ordinarily do, it helps to reduce risk of harm to clients and harm to us. Okay, so I see that as being a crucial component to consultation. And there's also the benefit of getting social support. And here I want to take a little bit of a detour with my bird's nest, carrying one of my bird's nest here. The detour is that ethically and legally, when those of us who are clinicians go home after our day of work, and our partner, whether she or he is a licensed professional or not, says, "How was your day?" We can't say, "Oh, that suicidal client who was threatening to harm his, ex-girlfriend's boyfriend was driving me crazy, da-da-da-da-da-da." We can't do it. And so the question becomes, and this is a major stressor, as many of you know, in relationships between therapists and their partners. I would venture to guess that this rule is broken more often than it's honored. But it's still the rule, and the reason for it is to maintain the integrity of the therapeutic process and also people's trust in us. And so one of the things we need is a regular place to go to talk about our clients and to do what we need to do, which is to explore things, talk about how we feel about them, deal with them, and get some assistance, because the work we do is very difficult. If you're expert and wonderful at what you do, terrific, and we can all fall in it. And I think Judd Marmor is right on the money. that sometimes the risk, and we've all known this, like we're people who are really knowledgeable and really, good at what they do, and it gets taken just a step or two too far, And we might forgive them because of liking them or who they are, but we know they've gone too far. The other thing, if we're lucky, is that we can improve services. So my hope would be that if we were, in fact, a consultation group for Dr. Goldstein, and he took 2 or 3 of these suggestions, that the course of events that transpired would not, in fact, have happened. Now, maybe that's not true. Maybe it wouldn't have. But it's quite possible that he could have avoided some of the difficulty and pain and maybe saved a life. Not inconsequential. Saved 2 lives. M&M, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is the hospital term for morbidity and mortality review. It's the root cause analysis, or taking a look at what went wrong with a case. I think we also, in learning, want to talk about what went right as well. Because often that kind of information is as important, if not more important, than what went wrong. There are a few warnings that I want to make about consultation. It is not the confessional. It's not a place where you say, mea culpa, I did this, I'm bad. So even though we may feel awful, even though Dr. Goldstein, and I don't think he did this with anyone, might feel, oh, I've made a terrible mistake. It's not the place to be talking about that. Why? Because potentially, if you're my consultant, and I go and I say, Colin was my consultant in this case, and I get sued, and they say, then they depose him, and they say, it's discoverable. They say, now, Colin, did Dan ever tell you that he blew it? Another warning is that groups, as you know, particularly when you're talking about being in a team, ongoing groups develop their own character and culture. And groupthink can occur, where groups begin to kind of insulate themselves from the outside if there are particularly a lot of pressures. And heaven knows that in community mental health right now and in nonprofits, there's a lot of pressure financial, and it has been for years. So if you're besieged, you can begin to kind of have skewed decision-making in the group. And groups have a risky shift phenomenon. That is, that group decision-making tends to be riskier than individual decision-making. And so it's important occasionally to check outside of the group process to be sure that the reality contact is being made. So use, kind of arm's length consultation occasionally. And the final warning or caveat is to be sure to do consultation in the context of a professional relationship. And I've already been touching on that with talking about partners and such. But this has to do partly with how one defines a professional relationship. Okay? And there are typically 2 components to the establishment of a professional contact. It has to do with the setting and the intent of the parties. Okay? And most of us have had situations where people have approached us in an odd setting, where it's not fitting, or in a relationship that we would say, this is not therapeutic or professional at all. It's important to be clear about that. And when we're on the flip side, when we're consulting, it's important to have the relationship that we're involved in doing consultation, whether it's with a group or another individual, clearly have the kind of markings of a professional contact. So it will involve, for example, being in our work setting or on our work phone. Okay? That doesn't mean if I happen to be at home and I want to call you and you're at work, or you're at home but you're in a private place, it doesn't mean I can't do a professional consultation, but I want to be as much as possible using professional phone, the setting being a professional one, and being clear that you want to consult with me and I'm asking you for a consultation. Or I'm meeting with you as a group and it's clearly for that purpose. So we don't do a professional consultation over at the Hard Rock Cafe at lunchtime. I have some colleagues who regularly do a hike around a lake in the East Bay every morning, and they're both clinicians, and they use that time for a consultation. Is that against the law? No, but you have to be mindful of a few things. First, is it confidential? And you'd want to make anonymous the information you're talking about, but you also want to be really conscious of, are we walking by other people? Are there other people potentially nearby? Right? Secondly, well, I could get a little bit more paranoid than that, but I'll stop right there. Secondly, if you get questioned, how are you going to differentiate that from a visit with a friend? Okay? If it's just intended to be physical exercise, you can see how a question may arise as, is this really, if we're going out jogging around the lake, is this really a professional consultation? So the cleaner it is, the clearer it is about the nature of that, consultation, the intent that we both have, the better.